Elevate your happy hour at the Library of Congress, which is open late on Thursdays for Live at the Library. Enjoy cocktails in the iconic Thomas Jefferson Building alongside live music, author talks, exhibits, and more. It's all free, eclectic, and inspired by the library's collections. On deck for August are outdoor film screenings, a K-pop night, and folk concert with Amanda Pascali. Plan your next night out at loc.gov/live.
Today on CityCast DC, have you walked by Wonderland Ballroom in Columbia Heights recently? Because the familiar picnic table streatery is gone. A string of high-profile closures of DC streateries has reignited the debate over outdoor dining, parking, public space, and just what kind of city Washington wants to be. Data reporter Alyssa Fowers and culture reporter Kaela Cote-Stemmermann have been following the issue from the very beginning, so they're here to explain how we got here, why this debate has flared up now, and what comes next for restaurants and the future of DC streets. Today's Monday, August 3rd. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Kaela, Alyssa, welcome back to the pod.
Hello.
Hi, Bridget.
So I had this moment with Streateries that felt like that final scene in the movie The Shining where the guy's like, what do you mean? You've always been here when it comes to Streateries. I was talking about Streateries and I thought, what do you mean? So Wonderland has always had a Streatery here. Not so. So I'd love to sort of start from the beginning. It can feel like we've always had these Streateries lining the city, but that's not actually the case. How did Streateries happen in the first place?
Yeah, so we've had them for 6 years, which is basically forever in DC time. The Streatery program started up in 2020 as sort of a temporary emergency measure. People weren't legally allowed to eat inside restaurants, or when they were, they just weren't comfortable doing it. So the city allowed restaurants to sort of take over parts of the literal street, usually parking spaces, and put up barriers and say, this is part of the restaurant now. If they didn't have a patio, if they didn't have a sidewalk cafe, this was their patio, this was their sidewalk cafe. So this was something that helped restaurants stay open in that kind of emergency situation. And then even when people moved back to eating indoors, the Streateries just kind of stayed.
Do you get the sense that this was meaningfully helpful for restaurants during those early COVID times?
Oh, yeah. The restaurants that we spoke with said it was essential in those months and years to keeping them in business.
I think it also added a lot to the social fabric of DC, right? I mean, just from, I'm sure you both have spent a lot of time at Streateries, and it's sort of opened up a new type of dining in DC and something that people have become really accustomed to and has become sort of the new norm here in DC. It feels almost like somewhat European in a sense, right? And I think now it's like very difficult to see those new spaces kind of go away.
Yeah, as someone who's also pretty COVID conscious, I really like having the option to eat outside in more places. It still makes me nervous to eat indoors, so I really like having them as an option.
Absolutely.
And I think in those early days of COVID, restaurants really did become these kind of contested spaces, right? There were people who didn't want a mask, and then they were like, okay, well, you have to wear a mask in the restaurant, but then take it off when you eat. And then a lot of those folks were like, that makes no sense. So it is interesting that in a kind of way, we're back there again, where restaurants and dining are this source of agita and sort of culture clash.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that it's not so much about COVID anymore, but it is about the thing that is taking up everybody's brain space in DC, which is the economy, which is keeping local businesses open, which is trying to have a city economy that works with all of the layoffs, with people spending less money because everything is more expensive, while the restaurants also have to spend more money because everything is more expensive. I think it really is something that kind of taps into whatever the anxiety of the moment is.
Yeah, so we know those very intense early days of COVID shifted and changed, but the Streateries, even after that, stuck around. Why is that?
People liked them. And also, they were free. So it didn't cost the restaurants ever anything to keep them open for years until just now, basically. So there were restaurants that had 12 parking spots that they took over and made into sort of an outdoor patio. And they didn't have to pay for space. They didn't have to pay for the barriers. It was just sort of free seating for them.
I think it brings in a huge amount of business for restaurants. And I was just dining at Wonderland Ballroom last weekend, which has their brunch. And I was thinking about this because this was right after that they closed their streetery down. And that's like half their seating. I was looking around, they have that one small patio area. They have no indoor seating for the brunch. And I think there was like less than half the people than there normally is dining outside during brunch. And it's like a huge weekend destination, I think, especially for Volo sports teams and people who are just out and about already. And I think I was just struck by exactly how huge that consequence is for some of these restaurants who have really small indoor spaces or who really draw people specifically for their outdoor dining experience.
Yeah, these have been around so long that I think businesses have really built up a plan, a model around them. The way that they make money now assumes that the streeteries will always be there.
Yeah, Wonderland is a particularly interesting example to me because I think the indoors is perhaps not really a draw like the streetery was. I guess I'll say that diplomatically. And I was literally just there yesterday or walking by, and the area where the streetery used to be, I think there were 3 cars parked there. So we're not talking about a huge amount of parking versus how much those streeteries were actually able to accommodate.
Yeah, I think that that's really what has a lot of residents in DC pissed off. It's not just the restaurants that are saying, like, we make money through this. It's people who really love having their neighborhoods lit up at night, who feel safer, who feel like they're living somewhere that's more vibrant, and that they really feel like they're kind of part of something, maybe, in a neighborhood that has these spaces, whether or not they themselves use them.
I definitely am one of the residents who likes streeteries, so I have to, own that. I mean, this is definitely one of those parts of city living that, oh, this is for me. I like this. So I am inclined to want to protect this and make all of these arguments why this is a really good thing that we should all be banding together to fight for. But there are people who did not like this permanent streetery setup. What were their arguments against them?
A lot of people in DC think that the government is trying to get rid of streeteries, that the permanent program is just a way to get rid of streeteries without saying we want all streeteries to go away. But when I talked to DDOT, they said the same thing that you just said, that they love streeteries and that they are trying to do things so that the streeteries can stay. I think that there are some cases where people don't like the fact of streeteries. So I think there are people who think that restaurants shouldn't necessarily be able to use public space for free forever because it is public space. It's not something that they own, they have paid rent on for a long time. I think that there are people who think they're ugly. There are people who worry about kind of safety issues. There are some problems with the way many of the temporary ones were set up. So most of them were not wheelchair accessible because they would be off of a curb and there wasn't enough room to have an actual ramp. There were some problems with flooding, like that kind of thing, where there were some problems with execution. I don't know that anybody is saying get rid of all streeteries forever. The problem with the permanent program that people have been talking about is that the restaurants think that it is too hard and too expensive to get these permits, that the new requirements are too stringent, that they need to do too much stuff, make too many changes, pay too much in rent. To keep these spaces themselves. So the problem is not necessarily someone wants streeteries to disappear, or doesn't want there to be permanent streeteries. It's that people don't like the way that DDOT tried to implement this.
Right, and the way they tried to implement it, it seems difficult. Like, it seems to me, who's, researched this and spent a lot of time looking at this, a bit of, it's a long process, it's expensive, and it's a little bit convoluted. And I think for some business owners, that's really intimidating. Can you describe maybe just like a little bit of the actual process that it takes for somebody to get a permanent streetery, just like in really broad strokes?
Yeah, there is a massive flowchart in their guidelines that's like color-coded by what department does what.
Nothing says easy like a massive color-coded flowchart.
Oh boy, you lost me already.
I love a flowchart, but that's literally my job, so... So The thing that everybody is trying to do with DDOT, when people are talking right now about getting a permit, what they mean is getting a design permit. So that is working with DDOT to make some kind of a site plan that DDOT says, okay, this meets the building code, this meets our requirements. And that is just like an architectural drawing. Once they have that, once that meets all the requirements, once that's been approved, and that's often a multi-step process that can take kind of a long time, the restaurant then has to pay those permitting costs. They have to get a construction permit. Once they have the construction permit, they have to then go ahead and actually do the construction. Once the construction's done, they have to get multiple inspections, get a certificate of use and a certificate of occupancy, and then they can open up their permanent streetery. Ooh. So, and I didn't even mention before this, if there was a temporary streetery, they have to take it down first. So there isn't really a world where you just sort of say, hey, it's me, I'm at the permitting office, I'm submitting a form, and my streetery gets to stay the way it was. That's just not how it works.
Right. Okay. So when we're seeing all of these streeteries being taken down around the city, and everybody sort of jumps to panic, right? Because their favorite restaurant, their favorite streetery is coming down, that could be because it's actually coming down permanently and they have not applied for a permit. Or it could be because they have to take their temporary one down in order to build something better and more permanent.
Yeah, and that's what Wonderland is doing right now. Their streetery came down because they had to take it down. Immediately after they took it down, they got the permit for the design, and they've now have their construction permit, so they're going to have to put it back up. And we heard from lots of restaurants that were in kind of that same spot where they have the permit, but it's not really operational yet. The timing looks really terrible. So if you think about it, it's sort of like high streetery season. It's the summer. I mean, I don't really want to be outside when it's 105 degrees, but some people do. But the thing is that this wasn't actually when this was supposed to happen. The other side of the story with this, where you have restaurants taking up a lot of air talking about how long it takes and how expensive it is and how inconvenient it is to be closing their streetery right now, is that the original deadline to take down your temporary streetery was November 30th. So the idea was that restaurants could put in their applications, take down their temporary streeteries over the winter, which they would have to do anyways. And then, or, they usually shut them down. They didn't actually have to physically take them down. And then in the spring, when the streeteries reopened, they could be this permanent one that had been built in the meantime. But DDOT ended up having to extend those deadlines multiple times, and they didn't really start sending out enforcement notices for streeteries that had these permits or the permit applications in until July. So it was sort of giving them the grace that put it in this terrible timing. It wasn't really intended to be this way.
Is that why this has become such a big news story just in the last couple of weeks where, you see these high-profile streeteries closing and then you hear from restaurant owners and business owners and bar owners about how cumbersome this process is? Is that why we're seeing all this happening right now?
I think so. I think that we talked about Wonderland Ballroom a little bit, and I think that that's kind of what kicked off this latest round of discourse. Can we call it discourse? Because Wonderland Ballroom, when they took their streetery down, someone wrote a tip into Popville, which is a local news site blog thing, anonymously, we don't know who it was, saying Wonderland is taking down their streetery because they're trying to work with the permit office, and the permit office is not responding to them. The permit office is, the post doesn't say obstructive, but that's what they're saying. And the internet exploded. People got so mad. I talked to the ANC commissioner for that area, and he was like, I got so many calls. I got so many emails. It was really an oversized reaction for that compared to other streetery closures. This was also really sort of jumping into the highlight because Purple Patch closed their streetery in a very similar time frame. They actually held a party for that closing, which was a big event. And Purple Patch is one of sort of the most covered restaurants in the city at this point, I think. Almost every story about streeteries talks to the owner of Purple Patch. So I think that was sort of already in the air, and then Wonderland closed down, I think within a week. And that really sort of pushed it into the limelight.
Is it true that DDOT was being obstructive when it came to Wonderland, or was that just sort of a tip that somebody described it that way and it just hit the zeitgeist and everybody ran with it? Or maybe we don't know, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle.
The short answer is no. No, they were not being obstructive. Wonderland's permit application has been waiting because DDOT had asked Wonderland to make changes to their site plan in March that they still hadn't made by July.
Oh,
so once they made the changes to that site plan, their permit was approved the next day. So it really wasn't that DDOT was sort of like, we're going to keep Wonderland from opening a streetery, like twirling their mustaches or whatever. So they weren't being obstructive. But, I mean, that is if you think this process isn't obstructive to start with.
I mean, I am sympathetic to DDOT because I think there are a lot of legitimate concerns around streeteries, specifically, like you mentioned, the safety elements of it. Some of them are a bit haphazard, to say the least. Obviously, yeah, there's accessibility concerns. There's traffic concerns when it comes to them. There's a lot of things that actually you have to think about. And, you know, obviously we've been doing this for so long that it's become the norm. Hopefully there's a middle ground here, but it seems like these concerns are valid, and I would love to see a world in which DC can address those and have permanent streeteries in a way that is more sustainable, more people can use, is safer, and helps businesses in the long run. So I am sympathetic to DDOT a little bit in this. After we did all this reporting on this, I've kind of come around a little bit to their side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is that people are so mad at them, and at the same time, they've actually cut their response times and their review times by a lot for this program. They've put a ton of resources into notifying and working with restaurants that they don't really put into anything else. This is just one tiny part of what they do. They have like 80,000 site plans a year. So this is like a really small chunk of what they do, and they're pouring a lot into it, and it is not more difficult than doing other stuff in public spaces in DC. If you're building things in DC, you just have to get a lot of permits and a lot of inspections and a lot of certificates. And so I think it's extremely reasonable for DDOT to say, no, you can't just keep things the way they were, because we approved your original streetery when it was a site plan drawn on a napkin. Like, in the emergency, they were responding to an emergency. So they said, yes, you can make this streetery. When people submitted literal hand-drawn site plans on napkins, or they had like a screenshot of Google Maps and they like doodled in where their streetery would be without any measurement, like that kind of thing. And I fully understand being like, no, actually, if this is going to be here for years, you do have to meet the building code. Like, that's not optional, actually.
It's not optional even if, you know, it's not optional even if people like me really, really, really want streeteries because they like the way it makes their neighborhood and city feel.
Oh my God, I know. It's so sad seeing. I live in Adams Morgan, and it feels desolate now. It feels so desolate because there's no streeteries anymore. And I'm like, where am I supposed to go for my Aperol spritz on a patio? What am I gonna do?
Or on that first nice day when you're like, oh, you know what's a good idea? Lyman's. And then you get to Lyman's and you're like, wow, the whole city had the same idea on a nice day to go to Lyman's and sit outside for a drink? What?
And the permanent guidelines doesn't mean that there won't be more streeteries. There probably won't be as many because the barriers are higher, both like figuratively and also the literal physical barriers have to be higher now for car safety and things like that. But I don't think that this means that there won't be streeteries. I think Adams Morgan is kind of an interesting example because there was a program to put sort of temporary model streeteries up that the city put up. And that was, I think, on 18th Street, I want to say. And then later they were like, oh, actually, we're taking these away. So they pulled them out from under the restaurants. And so that might be part of why Admo is so desolate right now. And certainly I think that could have been thought through a little bit better, maybe, not to editorialize.
Speaking of Adams Morgan, you know, that's definitely a place where you see the change. Are there places around the city where more of the streeteries stayed up versus places around the city where more of them have been removed?
I'm going to be a really annoying data person for a second and say that I don't actually know which streeteries stayed up and are operational right now. I know how many permits were approved, but that's not actually the same thing. DDOT said that 20 streeteries are still operational, but they didn't know which ones. So I can't tell you. However, where the permits have been approved and where people have actually reached out for permits and are waiting for approval, haven't withdrawn their applications, it's really different across the city. So like, if you look at both the permits that have been approved and the permits that are pending, so many of them are in Georgetown. I think 30% of the sort of potential future streeteries, that's everything that's approved or still pending, are in Georgetown, and that wasn't sort of what the distribution was like to start with. You also saw a lot more sort of streeteries applying to stay in the kind of Chinatown, Penn Quarter area. And in other places, they really just sort of vanished. So I think in the sort of Logan Thomas Circle area, there is one pending application. There are no approved streeteries. And before, there were 17 in that area. By area, I mean A and C. Sorry to be an annoying data person again. In DuPont Circle, there used to be 38. Now there are 4 approved and 2 pending. So it really has taken a different toll in different areas. And the sort of world where the streeteries were in neighborhoods where residents lived, but maybe tourists didn't go to hang out, is not really the world that we're going to be living in if things continue on this way.
I have a bit of good news to share from our sponsors at the DC Department of Behavioral Health. And that is that DC is turning a corner, and the numbers back it up. Fatal opioid overdose dropped 33% in this city from 2023 to 2024. Now, that is not just data. That's real people and real families that are still together. But listen, the work isn't done, and neither are we. If you or someone that you love is struggling, help is closer than you think. Text Live Long DC to 888-811 to connect with treatment, housing, and recovery support right here in the district. Free Narcan is available at nearly 40 locations across DC because nobody should lose someone for lack of access. And if you're in crisis right now, call or text 988. Know your worth, know your alternatives, know your value, know yourself. Recovery is possible. Find out how at knowyourpathdc.com. I live in Columbia Heights, and I feel like Columbia Heights heretofore has been one of the streetery capitals of the capital, you know? I just can't help but think how this is going to change the landscape of where DC residents are actually showing up and going for an Aperol Spritz on a nice day in the city.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things going on there. One is that there are places in the city where you physically can't have a streetery anymore. So 8th Street, there isn't a way to have a streetery on 8th Street because of the physical constraints. In the kind of the U and 18th Street areas, the people don't like eating outside. Now that they can eat inside, there's much less demand for them. So you see many fewer of them. So it's not necessarily that people, that the streeteries are all just sort of filtering to the richest parts of the city because of permitting processes. But it is definitely true that places that have sort of business improvement districts, which isn't the whole city, get a boost. And Georgetown specifically has a really active business improvement district that sort of helped with architectural designs, that helped with the costs, that helped with legal advice and getting through the process. And so I think that is part of why you see so many more of these restaurants trying to keep their streeteries in Georgetown. I think that that's not limited to Georgetown. In Adams Morgan, for instance, we talked to somebody who said that their business improvement district was incredibly important for keeping them going through this. But I think the support that people have in trying to navigate, oh God, suddenly I need a lawyer, suddenly I need an architect, which are not easy things, not inexpensive things. I think it really makes a difference when you're able to be somewhere that the neighborhood is hey, no, I'm helping you, I'm here. And the unfortunate thing is that this wasn't really supposed to be this way. DDOT actually budgeted money and had money to pay architects to make site plans for restaurants and to help them through this. And then when Congress froze spending in 2025, that money went other places to keep essential services going. So you end up in the situation where the places that had the resources keep the resources, and the places that didn't are much less likely to have their streeteries apply for permanent permits.
I'm curious, are business owners trying to put political pressure on the city to undo these changes?
So, yes. They also have successfully put political pressure on the city to undo some of the changes already. So when the initial round of guidelines came out, it was a higher cost per square foot for restaurants, and the the rules around like having a roof were much more stringent. You weren't allowed to have a roof, and now you are, and that kind of thing. So there was political pressure that did work in the past. And I think part of this like big media blitz is restaurants trying to say, hey, people love this. You know, people use this. This is part of our neighborhood. It's really important for our business. I think that that is absolutely pressure that they are putting on the government. And I think that it is something that people in the government have responded to, politicians have responded to in the past by making those regulations a little bit looser. And I think in the future, like JLG has said things about this going forward. And, you know, you see other people on the council expressing concern about it and that kind of thing.
And also, I think from a more of a soft power standpoint, too, you have a lot of these streeteries sort of throwing these like going away streetery parties, you know, like Tahana and Purple Patch and gathering communities. And I cannot say for sure if that's a purposeful ploy to like rally people against the closure of streeteries, but it does seem like it's really bringing in more energy and more attention to this issue for sure. And it's getting people to really care about it in a way that perhaps they didn't before, which does in turn put pressure on different local politicians throughout the city. So whether intentional or not, I think the attention that the issue is getting through some of these actions makes a big difference.
Janice Lewis-George has been pretty pro-streetery. Do you have any sense of what she could or might do differently?
She's talked about creating kind of a one-stop shop for permit applications that brings multiple agencies together, because part of the difficulty is that you are going through DDOT and then also the Department of Buildings at the same time, trying to get this done. And that could help. I did ask the director of DDOT about this, and she did not seem hopeful that it would actually make things easier for businesses or make a meaningful improvement. You know, to her mind, it's more of a, like, if there's a problem with the regulations, change the regulations. If there's a problem with the requirements, change the requirements. That's the problem, not having to bounce between agencies. But I think that that is not what the experience of many restaurant owners was as they were going through this, given how many people complained about needing to talk to multiple agencies.
You know, streeteries, it's an issue that we care about a lot in DC, but it's an issue that is popping up all over the country. Are there places where DC can sort of look and say, we should do it like that, or maybe we should not do it like that?
Yeah, so one thing that was really interesting is that I learned from DDOT that they decided actively not to follow New York's footsteps in some of these things. So New York City has regulations where you actually have to like deconstruct your streetery over the winter. You can't leave it up and have it empty. And that's a huge expense to have to take it up and put it down every year. And so that's not something that DDOT tried to require people in DC to do. And, you know, maybe it's that, maybe there's other reasons, but the rate of restaurants applying to keep a permanent streetery is much higher in DC than it was in New York when they implemented those guidelines. So, you know, hard to say exactly what it was, but maybe making it a little bit easier did help with that.
It's a complicated and kind of quickly changing situation that I know a lot of folks like me really care about. And Alyssa, I know you've been doing a lot of the reporting on this and kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of how this could change what the city looks like and feels like, right?
So we have a story up on CityCast right now that goes into a lot of detail about kind of how the regulations work and how they don't work. And we also have a big table, basically, that says which restaurants that had a temporary streetery have been approved for a permanent permit or are waiting. So if you're curious about a particular place, you can go and check and find out where things stand.
Thank you so much for breaking all of this down. Our favorite, not annoying data person, Alyssa, thank you for being here.
Incredibly informative.
And Kaela, thank you for your reporting on this too.
Thanks, Bridget.
That is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not share it with a friend who loves streeteries? You can rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you soon.